David Copperfield, Chapter 54, Mr. Micawber's Transactions. This is not the time at which I am to enter on the state of my mind beneath its load of sorrow. I came to think that the future was walled up before me, that the energy and action of my life were at an end, that I never could find any refuge but in the grave. I came to think so, I say, but not in the first shock of my grief. It slowly grew to that. If the events I go on to relate had not thickened around me, in the beginning to confuse, and in the end to augment, my affliction, it is possible, though I think not probable, that I might have fallen at once into this condition. As it was, an interval occurred before I fully knew my own distress, an interval in which I even supposed that its sharpest pangs were past, and when my mind could soothe itself by resting on all that was most innocent and beautiful, in the tender story that was closed forever, when it was first proposed that I should go abroad, or how it came to be agreed among us that I was to seek the restoration of my peace in change and travel, I do not, even now, distinctly know. The spirit of Agnes so pervaded all we thought, and said, and did, in that time of sorrow, that I assume I may refer the project to her influence. But her influence was so quiet that I know no more, and now, indeed, I began to think that in my old association of her with the stained-glass window in the church, a prophetic foreshadowing of what she would be to me, in the calamity that was to happen in the fullness of time, had found a way into my mind. In all that sorrow, from the moment, never to be forgotten, when she stood before me with her upraised hand, she was like a sacred presence in my lonely house. When the angel of death alighted there, my child wife fell asleep. They told me so when I could bear to hear it, on her bosom, with a smile. From my swoon, I first awoke to a consciousness of her compassionate tears, her words of hope and peace, her gentle face bending down as from a purer region nearer heaven, over my undisciplined heart, and softening its pain. Let me go on. I was to go abroad. That seemed to have been determined among us from the first. The ground now covering all that could perish of my departed wife, I waited only for what Mr. Micawber called the final pulverization of heap, and for the departure of the emigrants. T. The request of Traddles, most affectionate and devoted of friends in my trouble, we returned to Canterbury. I mean my aunt, Agnes, and I. We proceeded by appointment straight to Mr. Micawber's house, where, and at Mr. Wickfield's, my friend had been labouring ever since our explosive meeting. When poor Mrs. Micawber saw me come in my black clothes, she was sensibly affected. There was a great deal of good in Mrs. Micawber's heart, which had not been done out of it in all those many years. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Micawber, was my aunt's first salutation after we were seated. Pray, have you thought? About that emigration proposal of mine? My dear madam, returned Mr. Micawber, perhaps I cannot better express the conclusion at which Mrs. Micawber, your humble servant, and I may add our children, have jointly and severally arrived, than by borrowing the language of an illustrious poet, to reply that our boat is on the shore, and our bark is on the sea. "That's right," said my aunt. "I augur all sort of good from your sensible decision." "Madam, you do us a great deal of honor," he rejoined. He then referred to a memorandum. "With respect to the pecuniary assistance enabling us to launch our frail canoe on the ocean of enterprise, I have reconsidered that important business point, and would beg to propose my notes of hand, drawn, it is needless to stipulate, on stamps of the amounts respectively required by the various Acts of Parliament applying to such securities, at 18, 24, and 30 months. The proposition I originally submitted was 12, 18, and 24, but I am apprehensive that such an arrangement might not allow sufficient time for the requisite amount of something to turn up." "We might not," said Mr. Micawber, looking round the room as if it represented several hundred acres of highly cultivated land, "on the first responsibility becoming due, have been successful in our harvest, or we might not have got our harvest in. Labor, I believe, is sometimes difficult to obtain in that portion of our colonial possessions where it will be." "Our lot to combat with the teeming soil." "Arrange it in any way you please, sir," said my aunt. "Madam," he replied, "Mrs. Micawber and myself are deeply sensible of the very considerate kindness of our friends and patrons. What I wish is, to be perfectly businesslike, and perfectly punctual. Turning over, as we are about to turn over, an entirely new leaf, and falling back, as we are now in the act of falling back, for a spring of no common magnitude. It is important to my sense of self-respect, besides being an example to my son, that these arrangements should be concluded as between man and man." I don't know that Mr. Micawber attached any meaning to this last phrase. I don't know that anybody ever does, or did, but he appeared to relish it uncommonly, and repeated, with an impressive cough, as between man and man. "I propose," said Mr. Micawber, "bills, a convenience to the mercantile world, for which, I believe, we are originally indebted to the Jews, who appear to me to have had a devilish deal too much to do with them ever since, because they are negotiable. But if a bond, or any other description of security, would be preferred, I should be happy to execute any such instrument, as between man and man." My aunt observed, that in a case where both parties were willing to agree to anything, she took it for granted there would be no difficulty in settling this point. Mr. Micawber was of her opinion, in reference to our domestic, some pride, for meeting the destiny to which we are now understood to be self-devoted, I beg to report them. My eldest daughter attends at 5 every morning in a neighboring establishment, to acquire the process, if process it may be called, of milking cows. My younger children are instructed to observe, as closely as circumstances will permit, the habits of the pigs and poultry maintained in the poorer parts of the city, a pursuit from which they have, on 2 occasions, been brought home, within an inch of being run over. I have myself directed some attention, during the past week, to the art of baking, and my son Wilkins has issued forth with a walking stick and driven cattle, when permitted, by the rugged hirelings who had them in charge, to render any voluntary service in that direction, which I regret to say, for the credit of our nature, was not often, he being generally warned, with imprecations, to desist. "All very right indeed," said my aunt, encouragingly. "Mrs. Micawber has been busy, too, I have no doubt." "My dear madam," returned Mrs. Micawber, with her business-like air, "I am free to confess that I have not been actively engaged in pursuits immediately connected with cultivation or with stock, though well aware that both will claim my attention on a foreign shore. Such opportunities as I have been enabled to alienate from my domestic duties, I have devoted to corresponding at some length with my family. For I own it seems to me, my dear," said Mrs. Micawber, who always fell back on me, I suppose from all habit, to whomsoever else she might address her discourse at starting, "that the time is come when the past should be buried in oblivion, when my family should take Mr. Micawber by the hand, and Mr. Micawber should take my family by the hand, when the lion should lie down with the lamb, and my family be on terms with Mr. Micawber." I said I thought so too. "This, at least, is the light, my dear Mr. Copperfield," pursued Mrs. Micawber, "in which I view the subject. When I lived at home with my papa and mamma, my papa was accustomed to ask, when any point was under discussion in our limited circle, 'In what light does my Emma view the subject?' That my papa was too partial, I know. Still, on such a point as the frigid coldness which has ever subsisted between Mr. Micawber and my family, I necessarily have formed an opinion, delusive though it may be." "No doubt. Of course you have, said my aunt. "Precisely so," assented Mrs. Micawber. "Now, I may be wrong in my conclusions. It is very likely that I am. But my individual impression is, that the gulf between my family and Mr. Micawber may be traced to an apprehension, on the part of my family, that Mr. Micawber would require pecuniary accommodation. I cannot help thinking," said Mrs. Micawber, with an air of deep sagacity, "that there are members of my family who have been apprehensive that Mr. Micawber would solicit them for their names. I do not mean to be." "Conferred in baptism upon our children, but to be inscribed on bills of exchange, and negotiated in the money market." The look of penetration with which Mrs. Micawber announced this discovery, as if no one had ever thought of it before, seemed rather to astonish my aunt, who abruptly replied, "Well, upon the whole, I shouldn't wonder if you were right." Mr. Micawber being now on the eve of casting off the pecuniary shackles that have so long enthralled him, said Mrs. Micawber, and of commencing a new career in a country where there is sufficient range for his abilities, which, in my opinion, is exceedingly important, Mr. Micawber's abilities peculiarly requiring space, it seems to me that my family should signalize the occasion by coming forward. What I could wish to see would be a meeting between Mr. Micawber and my family at a festive entertainment, to be given at my family's expense, where Mr. Micawber's health and prosperity being proposed, by some leading member of my family, Mr. Micawber might have an opportunity of developing his views. "My dear," said Mr. Micawber, with some heat, "it may be better for me to state distinctly, at once, that if I were to develop my views to that assembled group, they would possibly be found of an offensive nature. my impression being that your family are, in the aggregate, impertinent snobs, and, in detail, unmitigated ruffians. Micawber, said Mrs. Micawber, shaking her head. No. You have never understood them, and they. Have never understood you. Mr. Micawber coughed. They have never understood you, Micawber, said his wife. They may be incapable of it. If so, that is their misfortune. I can pity their misfortune. I am extremely sorry, my dear Emma, said Mr. Micawber, relenting, to have been betrayed into any expressions that might, even remotely, have the appearance of being strong expressions. All I would say is, that I can go abroad without your family coming forward to favour me, in short, with a parting shove of their cold shoulders, and that, upon the whole, I would rather leave England with such impetus as I possess, than derive any acceleration of it from that quarter. At the same time, my dear, if they should condescend to reply to your communications, which our joint experience renders most improbable, far be it from me to be a barrier to your wishes. The matter being thus amicably settled, Mr. Micawber gave Mrs. Micawber his arm, and glancing at the heap of books and papers lying before Traddles on the table, said they would leave us to ourselves, which they ceremoniously did. My dear Copperfield, said Traddles, leaning back in his chair when they were gone, and looking at me with an affection that made his eyes red, and his hair all kinds of shapes. I don't make any excuse for troubling you with business, because I know you are deeply interested in it, and it may divert your thoughts. My dear boy, I hope you are not worn out. I am quite myself, said I, after a pause. We have more cause to think of my aunt than of anyone. You know how much she has done. Surely, surely, answered Traddles. Who can forget it? But even that is not all, said I. During the last fortnight, some new trouble has vexed her, and she has been in and out of London every day. Several times she has gone out early, and been absent until evening. Last night, Traddles, with this journey before her, it was almost midnight before she came home. You know what her consideration for others is. She will not tell me what has happened to distress her. My aunt, very pale, and with deep lines in her face, sat immovable until I had finished, when some stray tears found their way to her cheeks, and she put her hand on mine. It's nothing, Trot, it's nothing. There will be no more of it. You shall know by and by. Now, Agnes, my dear, let us attend to these affairs. I must do Mr. Micawber the justice to say, Traddles began, that although he would appear not to have worked to any good account for himself, he is a most untiring man when he works for other people. I never saw such a fellow. If he always goes on in the same way, he must be, virtually, about 200 years old, at present. The heat into which he has been continually putting himself, and the distracted and impetuous manner in which he has been diving, day and night, among papers and books, to say nothing of the immense number of letters he has written me between this house and Mr. Wickfield's, and often across the table. When he has been sitting opposite, and might much more easily have spoken, is quite extraordinary. Letters, cried my aunt. I believe he dreams in letters. There's Mr. Dick, too, said Traddles, has been doing wonders. As soon as he was released from overlooking Uriah Heep, whom he kept in such charge as I never saw exceeded, he began to devote himself to Mr. Wickfield. And really his anxiety to be of use in the investigations we have been making, and his real usefulness in extracting, and copying, and fetching, and carrying, have been quite stimulating to us. Dick is a very remarkable man, exclaimed my aunt, and I always said he was. Trot, you know it. I am happy to say, Miss Wickfield, pursued Traddles, at once with great delicacy and with great earnestness, that in your absence Mr. Wickfield has considerably improved. Relieved of the incubus that had fastened upon him for so long a time, and of the dreadful apprehension, it transparent that he said this to put us in good heart, and to enable Agnes to hear her father mentioned with greater confidence. But it was not the less pleasant for that. Now, let me see, said Traddles, looking among the papers on the table. Having counted our funds, and reduced to order a great mass of unintentional confusion in the first place, and of wilful confusion and falsification in the second, we take it to be clear that Mr. Wickfield might now wind up his business, and his agency trust, and exhibit no deficiency or defalcation whatever. Oh, thank heaven, cried Agnes, fervently. But, said Traddles, the surplus that would be left as his means of support, and I suppose the house to be sold, even in saying this, would be so small, not exceeding in all probability some hundreds of pounds, that perhaps, Miss Wickfield, it would be best to consider whether he might not retain his agency of the estate to which he has so long been receiver. His friends might advise him, you know, now he is free. You yourself, Miss Wickfield, Copperfield, I have considered it, Trotwood, said Agnes, looking to me, and I feel that it ought not to be, and must not be, even on the recommendation of a friend to whom I am so grateful, and owe so much. I will not say that I recommend it, observed Traddles. I think it right to suggest it. No more. I am happy to hear you say so, answered Agnes, steadily, for it gives me hope, almost assurance, that we think alike. Dear Mr. Traddles and dear Trotwood, Papa once free with honour, what could I wish for? I have always aspired, if I could have released him from the toils in which he was held, to render back some little portion of the love and care I owe him, and to devote my life to him. It has been, for years, the utmost height of my hopes. To take our future on myself will be the next great happiness, the next to his release from all trust and responsibility that I can know. Have you thought how, Agnes? Often. I am not afraid, dear Trotwood. I am certain of success. So many people know me here, and think kindly of me, that I am certain. Don't mistrust me. Our wants are not many. If I rent the dear old house, and keep a school, I shall be useful and happy. The calm fervour of her cheerful voice brought back so vividly, first the dear old house itself, and then my solitary home, that my heart was too full for speech. Traddles pretended for a little while to be busily looking among the papers. Next, Miss Trotwood, said Traddles, that property of yours. Well, "Sir," sighed my aunt, "all I have got to say about it is, that if it's gone, I can bear it, and if it's not gone, I shall be glad to get it back." "It was originally, I think, £8,000, consols," said Traddles. "Right," replied my aunt. "I can't account for more than 5, said Traddles, with an air of perplexity. "Thousand, do you mean?" inquired my aunt, with uncommon composure, "or pounds?" £5,000, said Traddles. "It was all there was," returned my aunt. "I sold 3, myself. 1, I paid for your articles, Trot, my dear, and the other 2 I have by me. When I lost the rest, I thought it wise to say nothing about that sum, but to keep it secretly for a rainy day. I wanted to see how you would come out of the trial, Trot, and you came out nobly, persevering, self-reliant, self-denying. So did Dick. Don't speak to me, for I find my nerves a little shaken." Nobody would have thought so, to see her sitting upright, with her arms folded, but she had wonderful self-command. "Then I am delighted to say," cried Traddles, beaming with joy, "that we have recovered the whole money." "Don't congratulate me, anybody," exclaimed my aunt. "How so, sir?" "You believed it had been misappropriated by Mr. Wickfield," said Traddles. "Of course I did," said my aunt, "and was therefore easily silenced. Agnes, not a word." "And indeed," said Traddles, "it was sold, by virtue of the power of management he held from you, but I needn't say by whom sold, or on whose actual signature. It was afterwards pretended to Mr. Wickfield, by that rascal, and proved, too, by figures, that he had possessed himself of the money, on general instructions, he said, to keep other deficiencies and difficulties from the light. Mr. Wickfield, being so weak and helpless in his hands as to pay you, afterwards, several sums of interest on a pretended principle which he knew did not exist, made himself, unhappily, a party to the fraud, and at last took the blame upon himself," added my aunt, "and wrote me a mad letter, charging himself with robbery, and wrong unheard of. Upon which I paid him a visit early one morning, called for a candle, burnt the letter, and told him if he ever could write me and himself, to do it, and if he couldn't, to keep his own counsel for his daughter's sake. If anybody speaks to me, I'll leave the house." We all remained quiet, Agnes covering her face. "Well, my dear friend," said my aunt, after a pause, "and you have really extorted the money back from him?" "Why, the fact is," returned Traddles, "Mr. Micawber had so completely hemmed him in, and was always ready with so many new points if an old one failed, that he could not escape from us. A most remarkable circumstance is, that I really don't think he grasped this sum even so much for the gratification of his avarice, which was inordinate, as in the hatred he felt for Copperfield. He said so to me, plainly. He said he would even have spent as much, to balk or injure Copperfield." "Ha!" said my aunt, knitting her brows thoughtfully, and glancing at Agnes. "And what's become of him?" "I don't know. He left here," said Traddles, "with his mother, who had been clamouring, and beseeching, and disclosing, the whole time. They went away by one of the London night coaches, and I know no more about him, except that his malevolence to me at parting was audacious. He seemed to consider himself hardly less indebted to me than to Mr. Micawber, which I consider, as I told him, quite a compliment." Do you suppose he has any money, Traddles? I asked. Oh dear, yes, I should think so, he replied, shaking his head, seriously. I should say he must have pocketed a good deal, in one way or other. But, I think you would find, Copperfield, if you had an opportunity of observing his course, that money would never keep that man out of mischief. He is such an incarnate hypocrite, that whatever object he pursues, he must pursue crookedly. It's his only compensation for the outward restraints he puts upon himself. Always creeping along the ground to some small end or other, he will always magnify every object in the way, and consequently will hate and suspect everybody that comes, in the most innocent manner, between him and it. So the crooked courses will become crookeder, at any moment, for the least reason, or for none. It's only necessary to consider his history here, said Traddles, to know that. He's a monster of meanness, said my aunt. Really, I don't know about that, observed Traddles thoughtfully. Many people can be very mean, when they give their minds to it. And now, touching Mr. Micawber, said my aunt. Well, really, said Traddles, cheerfully, I must, once more, give Mr. Micawber high praise. But for his having been so patient and persevering for so long a time, we never could have hoped to do anything worth speaking of. And I think we ought to consider that Mr. Micawber did right, for right's sake, when we reflect what terms he might have made with Uriah Heep himself, for his silence. I think so too, said I. Now, what would you give him? Inquired my aunt. Oh, before you come to that, said Traddles, a little disconcerted. I am afraid I thought it discreet to omit, not being able to carry everything before me, 2 points, in making this lawless adjustment, for it's perfectly lawless from beginning to end, of a difficult affair. Those IOUs, and so forth, which Mr. Micawber gave him for the advances he had, well, they must be paid, said my aunt. Yes, but I don't know when they may be proceeded on, or where they are, rejoined Traddles, opening his eyes. And I anticipate that, between this time and his departure, Mr. Micawber will be constantly arrested, or taken in execution. Then he must be constantly set free again, and taken out of execution, said my aunt. What's the amount altogether? Why, Mr. Micawber has entered the transactions, he calls them transactions, with great form, in a book, rejoined Traddles, smiling, and he makes the amount £103, 5. Now, what shall we give him, that sum included? Said my aunt. Agnes, my dear, you and I can talk about division of it afterwards. What should it be? £500. Upon this, Traddles and I both struck in at once. We both recommended a small sum in money, and the payment, without stipulation to Mr. Micawber, of the Uriah claims as they came in. We proposed that the family should have their passage and their outfit, and £100, and that Mr. Micawber's arrangement for the repayment of the advances should be gravely entered into, as it might be wholesome for him to suppose himself under that responsibility. To this, I added the suggestion that I should give some explanation of his character and history to Mr. Peggotty, who I knew could be relied on, and that to Mr. Peggotty should be quietly entrusted the discretion of advancing another 100. I further proposed to interest Mr. Micawber in Mr. Peggotty, by confiding so much of Mr. Peggotty's story to him as I might feel justified in relating, or might think expedient, and to endeavour to bring each of them to bear upon the other, for the common advantage. We all entered warmly into these views, and I may mention at once that the principals themselves did so, shortly afterwards, with perfect goodwill and harmony. Seeing that Traddles now glanced anxiously at my aunt again, I reminded him of the second and last point to which he had adverted. "You and your aunt will excuse me, Copperfield, if I touch upon a painful theme, as I greatly fear I shall," said Traddles, hesitating. "But I think it necessary to bring it to your recollection. On the day of Mr. Micawber's memorable denunciation, a threatening allusion was made by Uriah Heep to your aunt's husband." My aunt, retaining her stiff position and apparent composure, assented with a nod. "Perhaps," observed Traddles, "it was mere purposeless impertinence." "No," returned my aunt. "There was, pardon me, really such a person, and at all in his power," hinted Traddles. "Yes, my good friend," said my aunt. Traddles, with a perceptible lengthening of his face, explained that he had not been able to approach this subject, that it had shared the fate of Mr. Micawber's liabilities in not being comprehended in the terms he had made, that we were no longer of any authority with Uriah Heep, and that if he could do us, or any of us, any injury or annoyance, no doubt he would. My aunt remained quiet, until again some stray tears found their way to her cheeks. "You are quite right," she said. "It was very thoughtful to mention it." "Can I, or Copperfield, do anything?" asked Traddles, gently. "Nothing," said my aunt. "I thank you many times." "Trot, my dear, a vain threat. Let us have Mr. and Mrs. Micawber back, and don't any of you speak to me." With that she smoothed her dress, and sat, with her upright carriage, looking at the door. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Micawber," said my aunt, when they entered, "we have been discussing your emigration, with many apologies to you for keeping you out of the room so long, and I'll tell you what arrangements we propose." These she explained, to the unbounded satisfaction of the family, children and all being then present, and so much to the awakening of Mr. Micawber's punctual habits in the opening stage of all bill transactions, that he could not be dissuaded from immediately rushing out, in the highest spirits, to buy the stamps for his notes of hand. But his joy received a sudden check, for within 5 minutes he returned in the custody of a sheriff's officer, informing us, in a flood of tears, that all was lost. We, being quite prepared for this event, which was of course a proceeding of Uriah Heep's, soon paid the money, and in 5 minutes more Mr. Micawber was seated at the table, filling up the stamps with an expression of perfect joy, which only that congenial employment, or the making of punch, could impart in full completeness to his shining face. To see him at work on the stamps, with the relish of an artist, touching them like pictures, looking at them sideways, taking weighty notes of dates and amounts in his pocketbook, and contemplating them when finished, with a high sense of their precious value, was a sight indeed. "Now, the best thing you can do, sir, if you'll allow me to advise you," said my aunt, after silently observing him, "is to abjure that occupation forevermore." "Madam," replied Mr. Micawber, "it is my intention to register such a vow on the virgin page of the future. Mrs. Micawber will attest it." "I trust," said Mr. Micawber, solemnly, "that my son Wilkins will ever bear in mind that he had infinitely better put his fist in the fire than use it to handle the serpents that have poisoned the lifeblood of his unhappy parent." Deeply affected, and changed in a moment to the image of despair, Mr. Micawber regarded the serpents with a look of gloomy abhorrence, in which his late admiration of them was not quite subdued, folded them up and put them in his pocket. This closed the proceedings of the evening. We were weary with sorrow and fatigue, and my aunt and I were to return to London on the morrow. It was arranged that the Micawbers should follow us, after effecting a sale of their goods to a broker, that Mr. Wickfield's affairs should be brought to a settlement, with all convenient speed, under the direction of Traddles, and that Agnes should also come to London, pending those arrangements. We passed the night at the old house, which, freed from the presence of the heaps, seemed purged of a disease, and I lay in my old room, like a shipwrecked wanderer come home. We went back next day to my aunt's house, not to mine, and when she and I sat alone, as of old, before going to bed, she said, "Trot, do you really wish to know what I have had upon my mind lately?" "Indeed I do, Aunt. If there ever was a time when I felt unwilling that you should have a sorrow or anxiety which I could not share, it is now." "You have had sorrow enough, child," said my aunt, affectionately, "without the addition of my little miseries. I could have no other motive, Trot, in keeping anything from you." "I know that well," said I, "but tell me now. Would you ride with me a little way tomorrow morning?" asked my aunt. "Of course." "At 9, said she. "I'll tell you then, my dear." At 9, accordingly, we went out in a little chariot, and drove to London. We drove a long way through the streets, until we came to one of the large hospitals. Standing hard by the building was a plain hearse. The driver recognized my aunt, and, in obedience to a motion of her hand at the window, drove slowly off, we following. "You understand it now, Trot," said my aunt. "He is gone." "Did he die in the hospital?" "Yes." She sat immovable beside me, but, again I saw the stray tears on her face. "He was there once before," said my aunt presently. "He was ailing a long time, a shattered, broken man, these many years. When he knew his state in this last illness, he asked them to send for me. He was sorry then, very sorry." "You went, I know, Aunt." "I went. I was with him a good deal afterwards." "He died the night before we went to Canterbury," said I. My aunt nodded. "No one can harm him now," she said. It was a vain threat. We drove away, out of town, to the churchyard at Hornsey. "Better here than in the streets," said my aunt. "He was born here." We alighted, and followed the plain coffin to a corner I remember well, where the service was read consigning it to the dust. 36 years ago, this day, my dear," said my aunt, as we walked back to the chariot, "I was married. God forgive us all." We took our seats in silence, and so she sat beside me for a long time, holding my hand. At length she suddenly burst into tears, and said, "He was a fine-looking man when I married him, Trot, and he was sadly changed." It did not last long. After the relief of tears, she soon became composed, and even cheerful. Her nerves were a little shaken, she said, or she would not have given way to it. God forgive us all. So we rode back to her little cottage at Highgate, where we found the following short note, which had arrived by that morning's post from Mr. Micawber, Canterbury, Friday. "My dear Madam, and Copperfield, the fair land of promise lately looming on the horizon is again enveloped in impenetrable mists, and forever withdrawn from the eyes of a drifting wretch whose doom is sealed. another writ has been issued, in His Majesty's High Court of King's Bench at Westminster, in another cause of Heap versus Micawber, and the defendant in that cause is the prey of the sheriff having legal jurisdiction in this bailiwick. Now's the day, and now's the hour. See the front of battle lower. See approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery, consigned to which, and to a speedy end, for mental torture is not supportable beyond a certain point, and that point I feel I have attained. My course is run. Bless you, bless you. Some future traveler, visiting, from motives of curiosity, not unmingled, let us hope, with sympathy, the place of confinement allotted to debtors in this city, may, and I trust will, ponder, as he traces on its wall, inscribed with a rusty nail, the obscure initials, W.M. P.S. I reopen this to say that our common friend, Mr. Thomas Traddles, who has not yet left us, and is looking extremely well, has paid the debt and costs, in the noble name of Miss Trotwood, and that myself and family are at the height of earthly bliss. David Copperfield, Chapter 55. Tempest. I now approach an event in my life, so indelible, so awful, so bound by an infinite variety of ties to all that has preceded it, in these pages, that, from the beginning of my narrative, I have seen it growing larger and larger as I advanced, like a great tower in a plain, and throwing its forecast shadow even on the incidents of my childish days. For years after it occurred, I dreamed of it often. I have started up so vividly impressed by it, that its fury has yet seemed raging in my quiet room, in the still night. I dream of it sometimes, though at lengthened and uncertain intervals, to this hour. I have an association between it and a stormy wind, or the lightest mention of a seashore, as strong as any of which my mind is conscious. As plainly as I behold what happened, I will try to write it down. I do not recall it, but see it done, for it happens again before me. The time drawing on rapidly for the sailing of the emigrant ship, my good old nurse, almost broken-hearted for me, when we first met, came up to London. I was constantly with her, and her brother, and the Micawbers, they being very much together. But Emily I never saw. One evening when the time was close at hand, I was alone with Peggotty and her brother. Our conversation turned on Ham. She described to us how tenderly he had taken leave of her, and how manfully and quietly he had borne himself. Most of all, of late, when she believed he was most tried. It was a subject of which the affectionate creature never tired, and our interest in hearing the many examples which she, who was so much with him, had to relate, was equal to hers in relating them. My aunt and I were at that time vacating the 2 cottages at Highgate, I intending to go abroad, and she to return to her house at Dover. We had a temporary lodging in Covent Garden. As I walk home to it, after this evening's conversation, reflecting on what had passed between Ham and myself when I was last at Yarmouth, I wavered in the original purpose I had formed, of leaving a letter for Emily when I should take leave of her uncle on board the ship, and thought it would be better to write to her now. She might desire, I thought, after receiving my communication, to send some parting word by me to her unhappy lover. I ought to give her the opportunity. I therefore sat down in my room, before going to bed, and wrote to her. I told her that I had seen him, and that he had requested me to tell her what I have already written in its place in these sheets. I faithfully repeated it. I had no need to enlarge upon it, if I had had the right. Its deep fidelity and goodness were not to be adorned by me or any man. I left it out, to be sent round in the morning, with a line to Mr. Peggotty, requesting him to give it to her, and went to bed at daybreak. I was weaker than I knew then, and, not falling asleep until the sun was up, lay late and unrefreshed next day. I was roused by the silent presence of my aunt at my bedside. I felt it in my sleep, as I suppose we all do feel such things. "Trot, my dear," she said, when I opened my eyes. "I couldn't make up my mind to disturb you. Mr. Peggotty is here. Shall he come up?" I replied yes, and he soon appeared. "Massa Davy," he said, when we had shaken hands, "I give Emily your letter, sir, and she writ this here, and begged of me fur to ask you to read it, and if you see no hurt in't, to be so kind as take charge on't." "Have you read it?" said I. He nodded sorrowfully. I opened it, and read as follows: "I have got your message. Oh, what can I write, to thank you for your good and blessed kindness to me? I have put the words close to my heart. I shall keep them till I die. They are sharp thorns, but they are such comfort. I have prayed over them. Oh, I have prayed so much. When I find what you are, and what uncle is, I think what God must be, and can cry to him. Goodbye forever. Now, my dear, my friend, goodbye forever in this world. In another world, if I am forgiven, I may wake a child and come to you. All thanks and blessings. Farewell, evermore." This, blotted with tears, was the letter. "May I tell her as you don't see no hurt in't, and as you'll be so kind as take charge on't, Massa Davy?" said Mr. Peggotty, when I had read it. "Unquestionably," said I, "but I am thinking." "Yes, Massa Davy." "I am thinking," said I, "that I'll go down again to Yarmouth. There's time, and to spare, for me to go and come back before the ship sails. My mind is constantly running on him, in his solitude, to put this letter of her writing in his hand at this time, and to enable you to tell her, in the moment of parting, that he has got it, will be a kindness to both of them. I solemnly accepted his commission, dear good fellow, and cannot discharge it too completely. The journey is nothing to me. I am restless, and shall be better in motion. I'll go down tonight." Though he anxiously endeavored to dissuade me, I saw that he was of my mind, and this, if I had required to be confirmed in my intention, would have had the effect. He went round to the coach office, at my request, and took the box seat for me on the mail. In the evening I started, by that conveyance, down the road I had traversed under so many vicissitudes. "Don't you think that," I asked the coachman, in the first stage out of London, "a very remarkable sky? I don't remember to have seen one like it." "Nor I, not equal to it," he replied. "That's wind, sir. There'll be mischief done at sea, I expect, before long." It was a murky confusion, here and there blotted with a color like the color of the smoke from damp fuel, of flying clouds, tossed up into most remarkable heaps, suggesting greater heights in the clouds than there were depths below them to the bottom of the deepest hollows in the earth, through which the wild moon seemed to plunge headlong, as if, in a dread disturbance of the laws of nature, she had lost her way and were frightened. There had been a wind all day, and it was rising then, with an extraordinary great sound. In another hour it had much increased, and the sky was more overcast, and blew hard, but, as the night advanced, the clouds closing in and densely overspreading the whole sky, then very dark, it came on to blow, harder and harder. It still increased, until our horses could scarcely face the wind. Many times, in the dark part of the night, it was then late in September, when the nights were not short, the leaders turned about, or came to a dead stop, and we were often in serious apprehension that the coach would be blown over. Sweeping gusts of rain came up before this storm, like showers of steel, and, at those times, when there was any shelter of trees or lee walls to be got, we were fain to stop, in a sheer impossibility of continuing the struggle. When the day broke, it blew harder and harder. I had been in Yarmouth when the seamen said it blew great guns, but I had never known the like of this, or anything approaching to it. We came to Ipswich, very late, having had to fight every inch of ground since we were 10 miles out of London, and found a cluster of people in the marketplace, who had risen from their beds in the night, fearful of falling chimneys. Some of these, congregating about the inn-yard while we changed horses, told us of great sheets of lead having been ripped off a high church tower, and flung into a by-street, which they then blocked up. Others had to tell of country people, coming in from neighbouring villages, who had seen great trees lying torn out of the earth, and whole ricks scattered about the roads and fields. Still, there was no abatement in the storm, but it blew harder. As we struggled on, nearer and nearer to the sea, from which this mighty wind was blowing dead on shore, its force became more and more terrific. Long before we saw the sea, its spray was on our lips, and showered salt rain upon us. The water was out, over miles and miles of the flat country adjacent to Yarmouth, and every sheet and puddle lashed its banks, and had its stress of little breakers setting heavily towards us. When we came within sight of the sea, the waves on the horizon, caught at intervals above the rolling abyss, were like glimpses of another shore with towers and buildings. When at last we got into the town, the people came out to their doors, all aslant, and with streaming hair, making a wonder of the mail that had come through such a night. That I put up at the old inn, and went down to look at the sea, staggering along the street, which was strewn with sand and seaweed, and with flying blotches of sea foam, afraid of falling slates and tiles, and holding by people I met, at angry corners. Coming near the beach, I saw, not only the boatmen, but half the people of the town, lurking behind buildings, some, now and then braving the fury of the storm to look away to sea, and blown sheer out of their course in trying to get zigzag back. Joining these groups, I found bewailing women whose husbands were away in herring or oyster boats, which there was too much reason to think might have foundered before they could run in anywhere for safety. Grizzled old sailors were among the people, shaking their heads, as they looked from water to sky, and muttering to one another. Shipowners, excited and uneasy, children, huddling together, and peering into older faces, even stout mariners, disturbed and anxious, levelling their glasses at the sea from behind places of shelter, as if they were surveying an enemy, the tremendous sea itself, when I could find sufficient pause to look at it. In the agitation of the blinding wind, the flying stones, and sand, and the awful noise, confounded me. As the high watery walls came rolling in, and, at their highest, tumbled into surf, they looked as if the least would engulf the town. As the receding wave swept back with a hoarse roar, it seemed to scoop out deep caves in the beach, as if its purpose were to undermine the earth. When some white-headed billows thundered on, and dashed themselves to pieces before they reached the land, every fragment of the late hull seemed possessed by the full might of its wrath, rushing to be gathered to the composition of another monster. Undulating hills were changed to valleys, undulating valleys with a solitary storm bird sometimes skimming. Through them were lifted up to hills, masses of water shivered and shook the beach with a booming sound. Every shape tumultuously rolled on, as soon as made, to change its shape and place, and beat another shape and place away. The ideal shore on the horizon, with its towers and buildings, rose and fell. The clouds fell fast and thick. I seemed to see a rending and upheaving of all nature, not finding Ham among the people whom this memorable wind, for it is still remembered down there, as the greatest ever known to blow upon that coast, had brought together. I made my way to his house. It was shut, and as no one answered to my knocking, I went, by back ways and by lanes, to the yard where he worked. I learned, there, that he had gone to Lowestoft, to meet some sudden exigency of ship repairing in which his skill was required, but that he would be back tomorrow morning. In good time that I went back to the inn, and when I had washed and dressed, and tried to sleep, but in vain, it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I had not sat 5 minutes by the coffee-room fire, when the waiter, coming to stir it, as an excuse for talking, told me that 2 colliers had gone down, with all hands, a few miles away, and that some other ships had been seen labouring hard in the roads, and trying, in great distress, to keep off shore. Mercy on them, and on all poor sailors, said he, if we had another night like the last. I was very much depressed in spirits, very solitary, and felt an uneasiness in Ham's not being there, disproportionate to the occasion. I was seriously affected, without knowing how much, by late events, and my long exposure to the fierce wind had confused me. There was that jumble in my thoughts and recollections, that I had lost the clear arrangement of time and distance. Thus, if I had gone out into the town, I should not have been surprised, I think, to encounter someone who I knew must be then in London. So to speak, there was in these respects a curious inattention in my mind. Yet it was busy, too, with all the remembrances the place naturally awakened, and they were particularly distinct and vivid. I in this state, the waiter's dismal intelligence about the ships immediately connected itself, without any effort of my volition, with my uneasiness about Ham. I was persuaded that I had an apprehension of his returning from Lowestoft by sea, and being lost. This grew so strong with me, that I resolved to go back to the yard before I took my dinner, and asked the boat builder if he thought his attempting to return by sea at all likely. If he gave me the least reason to think so, I would go over to Lowestoft and prevent it by bringing him with me. I hastily ordered my dinner, and went back to the yard. I was none too soon, for the boat builder, with a lantern in his hand, was locking the yard gate. He quite laughed when I asked him the question, and said there was no fear. No man in his senses, or out of them, would put off in such a gale of wind, least of all Ham Peggotty, who had been born to seafaring. So sensible of this, beforehand, that I had really felt ashamed of doing what I was nevertheless impelled to do, I went back to the inn. If such a wind could rise, I think it was rising. The howl and roar, the rattling of the doors and windows, the rumbling in the chimneys, the apparent rocking of the very house that sheltered me, and the prodigious tumult of the sea, were more fearful than in the morning. But there was now a great darkness besides, and that invested the storm with new terrors, real and fanciful. I could not eat, I could not sit still, I could not continue steadfast to anything. Something within me, faintly answering to the storm without, tossed up the depths of my memory and made a tumult in them. Yet, in all the hurry of my thoughts, wild running with the thundering sea, the storm, and my uneasiness regarding ham were always in the foreground. My dinner went away almost untasted, and I tried to refresh myself with a glass or two of wine. In vain. I fell into a dull slumber before the fire, without losing my consciousness, either of the uproar out of doors, or of the place in which I was. Both became overshadowed by a new and indefinable horror, and when I awoke, or rather when I shook off the lethargy that bound me in my chair, my whole frame thrilled with objectless and unintelligible fear. I walked to and fro, tried to read an old gazetteer, listened to the awful noises, looked at faces, scenes, and figures in the fire. At length, the steady ticking of the undisturbed clock on the wall tormented me to that degree that I resolved to go to bed. It was reassuring, on such a night, to be told that some of the inn servants had agreed together to sit up until morning. I went to bed, exceedingly weary and heavy, but, on my lying down, all such sensations vanished, as if by magic, and I was broad awake, with every sense refined. For hours I lay there, listening to the wind and water, imagining, now, that I heard shrieks out at sea, now, that I distinctly heard the firing of signal guns, and now, the fall of houses in the town. I got up, several times, and looked out, but could see nothing, except the reflection in the window-panes of the faint candle I had left burning, and of my own haggard face looking in at me from the black void. At length, my restlessness attained to such a pitch, that I hurried on my clothes, and went downstairs. In the large kitchen, where I dimly saw bacon and ropes of onions hanging from the beams, the watchers were clustered together, in various attitudes, about a table, purposely moved away from the great chimney, and brought near the door. A pretty girl, who had her ears stopped with her apron, and her eyes upon the door, screamed when I appeared, supposing me to be a spirit, but the others had more presence of mind, and were glad of an addition to their company. One man, referring to the topic they had been discussing, asked me whether I thought the souls of the collier crews who had gone down were out in the storm. I remained there, I dare say, 2 hours. Once, I opened the yard gate, and looked into the empty street. The sand, the seaweed, and the flakes of foam were driving by, and I was obliged to call for assistance before I could shut the gate again, and make it fast against the wind. There was a dark gloom in my solitary chamber, when I at length returned to it, but I was tired now, and, getting into bed again, fell, off a tower and down a precipice, into the depths of sleep. I have an impression that for a long time, though I dreamed of being elsewhere and in a variety of scenes, it was always blowing in my dream. At length, I lost that feeble hold upon reality, and was engaged with 2 dear friends, but who they were I don't know, at the siege of some town in a roar of cannonading. The thunder of the cannon was so loud and incessant, that I could not hear something I much desired to hear, until I made a great exertion and awoke. It was broad day, 8 or 9 o'clock, the storm raging, in lieu of the batteries, and someone knocking and calling at my door. "What is the matter?" I cried, "A wreck! Close by!" I sprung out of bed, and asked, "What wreck?" "A schooner, from Spain or Portugal, laden with fruit and wine. Make haste, sir, if you want to see her. It's thought, down on the beach, she'll go to pieces every moment." The excited voice went clamoring along the staircase, and I wrapped myself in my clothes as quickly as I could, and ran into the street. Numbers of people were there before me, all running in one direction, to the beach. I ran the same way, outstripping a good many, and soon came facing the wild sea. The wind might by this time have lulled a little, though not more sensibly than if the cannonading I had dreamed of had been diminished by the silencing of 6 guns out of hundreds. But the sea, having upon it the additional agitation of the whole night, was infinitely more terrific than when I had seen it last. Every appearance it had then presented bore the expression of being swelled, and the height to which the breakers rose, and, looking over one another, bore one another down, and rolled in interminable hosts, was most appalling. In the difficulty of hearing anything but wind and waves, and in the crowd, and the unspeakable confusion, and my first breathless efforts to stand against the weather, I was so confused that I looked out to sea for the wreck, and saw nothing but the foaming heads of the great waves. A half-dressed boatman, standing next me, pointed with his bare arm, a tattooed arrow on it, pointing in the same direction, to the left. Then, O grey heaven, I saw it, close in upon us. One mast was broken short off, 6 or 8 feet from the deck, and lay over the side, entangled in a maze of sail and rigging, and all that ruin, as the ship rolled and beat, which she did without a moment's pause, and with a violence quite inconceivable, beat the side as if it would stave it in. Some efforts were even then being made to cut this portion of the wreck away, for, as the ship, which was broadside on, turned towards us in her rolling, I plainly descried her people at work with axes, especially one active figure with long curling hair, conspicuous among the rest. But a great cry, which was audible even above the wind and water, rose from the shore at this moment. The sea, sweeping over the rolling wreck, made a clean breach, and carried men, spars, casks, planks, bulwarks, heaps of such toys, into the boiling surge. The second mast was yet standing, with the rags of a rent sail, and a wild confusion of broken cordage flapping to and fro. The ship had struck once, the same boatman hoarsely said in my ear, and then lifted in and struck again. I understood him to add that she was parting amidships, and I could readily suppose so, for the rolling and beating were too tremendous for any human work to suffer long. As he spoke, there was another great cry of pity from the beach, for men arose with the wreck out of the deep, clinging to the rigging of the remaining mast. Uppermost, the active figure with the curling hair, there was a bell on board, and as the ship rolled and dashed, like a desperate creature driven mad, now showing us the whole sweep of her deck, as she turned on her beam ends towards the shore, now nothing but her keel, as she sprung wildly over and turned towards the sea, the bell rang, and its sound, the knell of those unhappy men, was borne towards us on the wind. Again we lost her, and again she rose. 2 men were gone. The agony on the shore increased. Men groaned, and clasped their hands. Women shrieked, and turned away their faces. Some ran wildly up and down along the beach, crying for help where no help could be. I found myself one of these, frantically imploring a knot of sailors whom I knew, not to let those 2 lost creatures perish before our eyes. They were making out to me, in an agitated way, I don't know how, for the little I could hear I was scarcely composed enough to understand, that the lifeboat had been bravely manned an hour ago, and could do nothing, and that as no man would be so desperate as to attempt to wade off with a rope, and establish a communication with the shore, there was nothing left to try, when I noticed that some new sensation moved the people on the beach, and saw them part, and Ham come breaking through them to the front, that I ran to him, as well as I know, to repeat my appeal for help. But, distracted though I was, by a sight so new to me and terrible, the determination in his face, and his look out to sea, exactly the same look as I remembered in connection with the morning after Emily's flight, awoke me to a knowledge of his danger. I held him back with both arms, and implored the men with whom I had been speaking not to listen to him, not to do murder, not to let him stir from off that sand. Another cry arose on shore, and looking to the wreck, we saw the cruel sail, with blow on blow, beat off the lower of the two men, and fly up in triumph round the active figure left alone upon the mast against such a sight, and against such determination as that of the calmly desperate man who was already accustomed to lead half the people present. I might as hopefully have entreated the wind. "Massa Davy," he said, cheerily grasping me by both hands, "if my time is come, 'tis come. If t'an't, I'll bide it. Lord above bless you, and bless all. Mates, make me ready. I may going off." I was swept away, but not unkindly, to some distance, where the people around me made me stay, urging, as I confusedly perceived, that he was bent on going, with help or without, and that I should endanger the precautions for his safety by troubling those with whom they rested. I don't know what I answered, or what they rejoined, but I saw hurry on the beach, and men running with ropes from a capstan that was there, and penetrating into a circle of figures that hid him from me. Then I saw him standing alone, in a seaman's frock and trousers, a rope in his hand, or slung to his wrist, another round his body, and several of the best men holding, at a little distance, to the ladder, which he laid out himself, slack upon the shore, at his feet. The wreck, even to my unpracticed eye, was breaking up. I saw that she was parting in the middle, and that the life of the solitary man upon the mast hung by a thread. Still, he clung to it. He had a singular red cap on, not like a sailor's cap, but of a finer color, and as the few yielding planks between him and destruction rolled and bulged, and his anticipative death knell rung, he was seen by all of us to wave it. I saw him do it now, and thought I was going distracted, when his action brought an old remembrance to my mind of a once dear friend. Ham watched the sea, standing alone, with the silence of suspended breath behind him, and the storm before, until there was a great retiring wave, when, with a backward glance at those who held the rope which was made fast round his body, he dashed in after it, and in a moment was buffeting with the water, rising with the hills, falling with the valleys, lost beneath the foam, then drawn again to land. They hauled in hastily. He was hurt. I saw blood on his face, from where I stood, but he took no thought of that. He seemed hurriedly to give them some directions for leaving him more free, or so I judged from the motion of his arm, and was gone as before. And now he made for the wreck, rising with the hills, falling with the valleys, lost beneath the rugged foam, borne in towards the shore, borne on towards the ship, striving hard and valiantly. The distance was nothing, but the power of the sea and wind made the strife deadly. At length he neared the wreck. He was so near, that with one more of his vigorous strokes he would be clinging to it, when a high, green, vast hillside of water, moving on shoreward, from beyond the ship, he seemed to leap up into it with a mighty bound, and the ship was gone. Some eddying fragments I saw in the sea, as if a mere cask had been broken, in running to the spot where they were hauling in. Consternation was in every face. They drew him to my very feet, insensible, dead. He was carried to the nearest house, and, no one preventing me now, I remained near him, busy, while every means of restoration were tried, but he had been beaten to death by the great wave, and his generous heart was stilled forever. As I sat beside the bed, when hope was abandoned and all was done, a fisherman, who had known me when Emily and I were children, and ever since, whispered my name at the door. "Sir," said he, with tears starting to his weather-beaten face, which, with his trembling lips, was ashy pale, "will you come over yonder?" The old remembrance that had been recalled to me was in his look. I asked him, terror-stricken, leaning on the arm he held out to support me, "Has a body come ashore?" He said, "Yes." "Do I know it?" I asked then. He answered nothing, but he led me to the shore, and on that part of it where she and I had looked for shells, 2 children, on that part of it where some lighter fragments of the old boat, blown down last night, had been scattered by the wind, among the ruins of the home he had wronged, I saw him lying with his head upon his arm, as I had often seen him lie at school. David Copperfield, Chapter 56, The New Wound, and the old No Need, O Steerforth, to have said, when we last spoke together, in that hour which I so little deemed to be our parting hour, no need to have said, "Think of me at my best." I had done that ever, and could I change now, looking on this sight? They brought a hand-bier, and laid him on it, and covered him with a flag, and took him up and bore him on towards the houses. All the men who carried him had known him, and gone sailing with him, and seen him merry and bold. They carried him through the wild roar, a hush in the midst of all the tumult, and took him to the cottage where death was already. But when they set the bier down on the threshold, they looked at one another, and at me, and whispered. I knew why. They felt as if it were not right to lay him down in the same quiet room. We went into the town, and took our burden to the inn. So soon as I could at all collect my thoughts, I sent for Joram, and begged him to provide me a conveyance in which it could be got to London in the night. I knew that the care of it, and the hard duty of preparing his mother to receive it, could only rest with me, and I was anxious to discharge that duty as faithfully as I could. I chose the night for the journey, that there might be less curiosity when I left the town. But, although it was nearly midnight when I came out of the yard in a chaise, followed by what I had in charge, there were many people waiting. At intervals, along the town, and even a little way out upon the road, I saw more, but at length only the bleak night and the open country were around me, and the ashes of my youthful friendship upon a mellow autumn day, about noon, when the ground was perfumed by fallen leaves, and many more, in beautiful tints of yellow, red, and brown, yet hung upon the trees, through which the sun was shining. I arrived at Highgate. I walked the last mile, thinking as I went along of what I had to do, and left the carriage that had followed me all through the night, awaiting orders to advance. The house, when I came up to it, looked just the same. Not a blind was raised. No sign of life was in the dull paved court, with its covered way leading to the disused door. The wind had quite gone down, and nothing moved. I had not, at first, the courage to ring at the gate, and when I did ring, my errand seemed to me to be expressed in the very sound of the bell. The little parlour-maid came out, with the key in her hand, and looking earnestly at me as she unlocked the gate, said, "I beg your pardon, sir. Are you ill?" "I have been much agitated, and am fatigued." "Is anything the matter, sir? Mr. James?" "Hush," said I. "Yes, something has happened, that I have to break to Mrs. Steerforth. She is at home." The girl anxiously replied that her mistress was very seldom out now, even in a carriage, that she kept her room, that she saw no company, but would see me. Her mistress was up, she said, and Miss Dartle was with her. What message should she take upstairs? Giving her a strict charge to be careful of her manner, and only to carry. In my card and say I waited, I sat down in the drawing-room, which we had now reached, until she should come back. Its former pleasant air of occupation was gone, and the shutters were half closed. The harp had not been used for many and many a day. His picture, as a boy, was there. The cabinet in which his mother had kept his letters was there. I wondered if she ever read them now, if she would ever read them more. The house was so still that I heard the girl's light step upstairs. On her return, she brought a message, to the effect that Mrs. Steerforth was an invalid and could not come down, but that if I would excuse her being in her chamber, she would be glad to see me. In a few moments I stood before her. She was in his room, not in her own. I felt, of course, that she had taken to occupy it, in remembrance of him, and that the many tokens of his old sports and accomplishments, by which she was surrounded, remained there, just as he had left them, for the same reason. She murmured, however, even in her reception of me, that she was out of her own chamber because its aspect was unsuited to her infirmity, and with her stately look repelled the least suspicion of the truth. Her chair, as usual, was Rosa Dartle. From the first moment of her dark eyes resting on me, I saw she knew I was the bearer of evil tidings. The scar sprung into view that instant. She withdrew herself a step behind the chair, to keep her own face out of Mrs. Steerforth's observation, and scrutinized me. With a piercing gaze that never faltered, never shrunk. "I am sorry to observe you are in mourning, sir," said Mrs. Steerforth. "I am unhappily a widower," said I. "You are very young to know so great a loss," she returned. "I am grieved to hear it. I am grieved to hear it. I hope time will be good to you." "I hope time," said I, looking at her, "will be good to all of us. Dear Mrs. Steerforth, we must all trust to that, in our heaviest misfortunes." The earnestness of my manner, and the tears in my eyes, alarmed her. The whole course of her thoughts appeared to stop, and changed. I tried to command my voice in gently saying his name, but it trembled. She repeated it to herself 2 or 3 times, in a low tone. Then, addressing me, she said, with enforced calmness, "My son is ill. Very ill. You have seen him?" "I have." "Are you reconciled?" I could not say yes, I could not say no. She slightly turned her head towards the spot where Rosa Dartle had been standing at her elbow, and in that moment I said, by the motion of my lips, to Rosa, "Dead." That Mrs. Steerforth might not be induced to look behind her, and read, plainly written, what she was not yet prepared to know, I met her look quickly, but I had seen Rosa Dartle throw her hands up in the air with vehemence of despair and horror, and then clasp them on her face. The handsome lady, so like, oh so like, regarded me with a fixed look, and put her hand to her forehead. I besought her to be calm, and prepare herself to bear what I had to tell, but I should rather have entreated her to weep, for she sat like a stone figure. "When I was last here," I faltered, "Miss Dartle told me he was sailing here and there. The night before last was a dreadful one at sea. If he were at sea that night, and near a dangerous coast, as it is said he was, and if the vessel that was seen should really be the ship which—" "Rosa," said Mrs. Steerforth, "come to me." She came, but with no sympathy or gentleness. Her eyes gleamed like fire as she confronted his mother, and broke into a frightful laugh. "Now," she said, "is your pride appeased, you madwoman? Now has he made atonement to you, with his life. Do you hear? His life." Mrs. Steerforth, fallen back stiffly in her chair, and making no sound but a moan, cast her eyes upon her with a wide stare. "I," cried Rosa, smiting herself passionately on the breast, "look at me. Moan, and groan, and look at me. Look here," striking the scar, "at your dead child's handiwork." The moan the mother uttered, from time to time, went to my heart. Always the same. Always inarticulate and stifled. Always accompanied with an incapable motion of the head, but with no change of face. Always proceeding from a rigid mouth and closed teeth, as if the jaw were locked and the face frozen up in pain. "Do you remember when he did this?" she proceeded. "Do you remember when, in his inheritance of your nature, and in your pampering of his pride and passion, he did this, and disfigured me for life? Look at me, marked until I die with his high displeasure, and moan and groan for what you made him." "Miss Dartle," I entreated her, "for heaven's sake, I will speak," she said, turning on me with her lightning eyes. "Be silent, you. Look at me, I say, proud mother of a proud, false son. Moan for your nurture of him, moan for your corruption of him, moan for your loss of him, moan for mine." She clenched her hand, and trembled through her spare, worn figure, as if her passion were killing her by inches. "You resent his self-will," she exclaimed. "You, injured by his haughty temper. You, who opposed to both, when your hair was grey, the qualities which made both when you gave him birth. You, who from his cradle reared him to be what he was, and stunted what he should have been. Are you rewarded, now, for your years of trouble? Oh, Miss Dartle, shame! Oh, cruel!" "I tell you," she returned, "I will speak to her. No power on earth should stop me, while I was standing here. Have I been silent all these years, and shall I not speak now? I loved him better than you ever loved him," turning on her fiercely. "I could have loved him, and asked no return. If I had been his wife, I could have been the slave of his caprices for a word of love a year. I should have been. Who knows it better than I? You were exacting, proud, punctilious, selfish. My love would have been devoted, would have trod your paltry whimpering underfoot." With flashing eyes, she stamped upon the ground as if she actually did it. "Look here," she said, striking the scar again, with a relentless hand. "When he grew into the better understanding of what he had done, he saw it, and repented of it. I could sing to him, and talk to him, and show the ardor that I felt in all he did, and attain with labor to such knowledge as most interested him, and I attracted him. When he was freshest and truest, he loved me. Yes, he did. Many a time, when you were put off with a slight word, he has taken me to his heart." She said it with a taunting pride in the midst of her frenzy, for it was little less, yet with an eager remembrance of it, in which the smouldering embers of a gentler feeling kindled. For the moment I descended, as I might have known I should, but that he fascinated me with his boyish courtship, into a doll, a trifle for the occupation of an idle hour, to be dropped, and taken up, and trifled with, as the inconstant humour took him. When he grew weary, I grew weary. As his fancy died out, I would no more have tried to strengthen any power I had, than I would have married him on his being forced to take me for his wife. We fell away from one another without a word. Perhaps you saw it, and were not sorry. Since then, I have been a mere disfigured piece of furniture between you both, having no eyes, no ears, no feelings, no remembrances. Moan for what you made him, not for your love. I tell you that the time was when I loved him better than you ever did. She stood with her bright, angry eyes, confronting the wide stare and the set face, and softened no more when the moaning was repeated than if the face had been a picture. Miss Dartle, said I, if you can be so obdurate as not to feel for this afflicted mother, who feels for me? She sharply retorted. She has sown this. Let her moan for the harvest that she reaps today. And if his faults, I began, faults, she cried, bursting into passionate tears. Who dares malign him? He had a soul worth millions of the friends to whom he stooped. No one can have loved him better, no one can hold him in dearer remembrance than I replied. I meant to say, if you have no compassion for his mother, or if his faults, you have been bitter on them, it's false, she cried, tearing her black hair. I loved him. If his faults cannot, I went on, be banished from your remembrance, in such an hour, look at that figure, even as one you have never seen before, and render it some help. All this time, the figure was unchanged, and looked unchangeable, motionless, rigid, staring, moaning in the same dumb way from time to time, with the same helpless motion of the head, but giving no other sign of life. Miss Dartle suddenly kneeled down before it, and began to loosen the dress. A curse upon you, she said, looking round at me, with a mingled expression of rage and grief. It was in an evil hour that you ever came here. A curse upon you. Go. After passing out of the room, I hurried back to ring the bell, the sooner to alarm the servants. She had then taken the impassive figure in her arms, and, still upon her knees, was weeping over it, kissing it, calling to it, rocking it to and fro upon her bosom like a child, and trying every tender means to rouse the dormant senses. No longer afraid of leaving her, I noiselessly turned back again, and alarmed the house as I went out. Later in the day, I returned, and we laid him in his mother's room. She was just the same, they told me. Miss Dartle never left her. Doctors were in attendance, many things had been tried, but she lay like a statue, except for the low sound now and then I went through the dreary house, and darkened the windows. The windows of the chamber where he lay, I darkened last. I lifted up the leaden hand, and held it to my heart, and all the world seemed death and silence, broken only by his mother's moaning. David Copperfield, Chapter 57. The emigrants. One thing more I had to do, before yielding myself to the shock of these emotions. It was, to conceal what had occurred, from those who were going away, and to dismiss them on their voyage in happy ignorance. In this, no time was to be lost. That I took Mr. Micawber aside that same night, and confided to him the task of standing between Mr. Peggotty and intelligence of the late catastrophe. He zealously undertook to do so, and to intercept any newspaper through which it might, without such precautions, reach him. If it penetrates to him, sir, said Mr. Micawber, striking himself on the breast, it shall first pass through this body. Mr. Micawber, I must observe, in his adaptation of himself to a new state of society, had acquired a bold buccaneering air, not absolutely lawless, but defensive and prompt. One might have supposed him a child of the wilderness, long accustomed to live out of the confines of civilization, and about to return to his native wilds. He had provided himself, among other things, with a complete suit of oilskin, and a straw hat with a very low crown, pitched or corked on the outside. In this rough clothing, with a common mariner's telescope under his arm, and a shrewd trick of casting up his eye at the sky as looking out for dirty weather, he was far more nautical, after his manner, than Mr. Peggotty. His whole family, if I may so express it, were cleared for action. I found Mrs. Micawber in the closest and most uncompromising of bonnets, made fast under the chin, and in a shawl which tied her up, as I had been tied up, when my aunt first received me, like a bundle, and was secured behind at the waist, in a strong knot. Miss Micawber I found made snug for stormy weather, in the same manner, with nothing superfluous about her. Master Micawber was hardly visible in a Guernsey shirt, and the shaggiest suit of slops I ever saw, and the children were done up, like preserved meats, in impervious cases. Both Mr. Micawber and his eldest son wore their sleeves loosely turned back at the wrists, as being ready to lend a hand in any direction, and to tumble up, or sing out, "Yo, heave, yo," on the shortest notice. Thus Traddles and I found them at nightfall, assembled on the wooden steps, at that time known as Hungerford Stairs, watching the departure of a boat with some of their property on board. I had told Traddles of the terrible event, and it had greatly shocked him, but there could be no doubt of the kindness of keeping it a secret, and he had come to help me in this last service. It was here that I took Mr. Micawber aside, and received his promise. The Micawber family were lodged in a little, dirty, tumble-down public-house, which in those days was close to the stairs, and whose protruding wooden rooms overhung the river. The family, as emigrants, being objects of some interest in and about Hungerford, attracted so many beholders, that we were glad to take refuge in their room. It was one of the wooden chambers upstairs, with the tide flowing underneath. My aunt and Agnes were there, busily making some little extra comforts, in the way of dress, for the children. Peggotty was quietly assisting, with the old and sensible workbox, yard measure, and bit of wax candle before her, that had now outlived so much that it was not easy to answer her inquiries, still less to whisper Mr. Peggotty, when Mr. Micawber brought him in, that I had given the letter, and all was well. But I did both, and made them happy. If I showed any trace of what I felt, my own sorrows were sufficient to account for it. "And when does the ship sail, Mr. Micawber?" asked my aunt. Mr. Micawber considered it necessary to prepare either my aunt or his wife, by degrees, and said, "Sooner than he had expected yesterday. The boat brought you word, I suppose?" said my aunt. "It did, he returned. "Well," said my aunt. "And she sails?" "Madam," he replied, "I am informed that we must positively be on board before 7 tomorrow morning." "Heyday," said my aunt, "that's soon. Is it a sea-going fact, Mr. Peggotty?" "'Tis so, She'll drop down the river with that there a tide. If Master Davy and my sister comes aboard at Gravesend, arternoon next day, they'll see the last on us." "And that we shall do," said I, "be sure." "Until then, and until we are at sea," observed Mr. Micawber, with a glance of intelligence at me, "Mr. Peggotty and myself will constantly keep a double lookout together, on our goods and chattels. Emma, my love, said Mr. Micawber, clearing his throat in his magnificent way, my friend Mr. Thomas Traddles is so obliging as to solicit, in my ear, that he should have the privilege of ordering the ingredients necessary to the composition of a moderate portion of that beverage which is peculiarly associated, in our minds, with the roast beef of Old England. I allude to, in short, punch. Under ordinary circumstances, I should scruple to entreat the indulgence of Miss Trotwood and Miss Wickfield, but I can only say for myself, said my aunt, that I will drink all happiness and success to you, Mr. Micawber, with the utmost pleasure. And I too, said Agnes, with a smile. Mr. Micawber immediately descended to the bar, where he appeared to be quite at home, and in due time returned with a steaming jug. I could not but observe that he had been peeling the lemons with his own clasp knife, which, as became the knife of a practical settler, was about a foot long, and which he wiped, not wholly without ostentation, on the sleeve of his coat. Mrs. Micawber and the two elder members of the family I now found to be provided with similar formidable instruments, while every child had its own wooden spoon attached to its body by a strong line. In a similar anticipation of life afloat, and in the bush, Mr. Micawber, instead of helping Mrs. Micawber and his eldest son and daughter to punch, in wine-glasses, which he might easily have done, for there was a shelf full in the room, served it out to them in a series of villainous little tin pots, and I never saw him enjoy anything so much as drinking out of his own particular pint pot, and putting it in his pocket at the close of the evening. The luxuries of the old country, said Mr. Micawber, with an intense satisfaction in their announcement, we abandon. The denizens of the forest cannot, of course, expect to participate in the refinements of the land of the free. Here, a boy came in to say that Mr. Micawber was wanted downstairs. I have a presentiment, said Mrs. Micawber, setting down her tin pot, that it is a member of my family. If so, my dear, observed Mr. Micawber, with his usual suddenness of warmth on that subject, as the member of your family, whoever he, she, or it may be, has kept us waiting for a considerable period, perhaps the member may now wait my convenience. Micawber, said his wife, in a low tone, at such a time as this, it is not meet, said Mr. Micawber, rising, that every nice offence should bear its comment. Emma, I stand reproved. The loss, Micawber, observed his wife, has been my family's, not yours. If my family are at length sensible of the deprivation to which their own conduct has, in the past, exposed them, and now desire to extend the hand of fellowship, let it not be repulsed. My dear, he returned, so be it. If not for their sakes, for mine, Micawber, said his wife. Emma, he returned, that view of the question is, at such a moment, irresistible. I cannot, even now, distinctly pledge myself to fall upon your family's neck, but the member of your family, who is now in attendance, shall have no genial warmth frozen by me. Mr. Micawber withdrew, and was absent some little time, in the course of which Mrs. Micawber was not wholly free from an apprehension that words might have arisen between him and the member. At length the same boy reappeared, and presented me with a note written in pencil, and headed, in a legal manner, Heap versus Micawber. From this document, I learned that Mr. Micawber, being again arrested, was in a final paroxysm of despair, and that he begged me to send him his knife and pint pot, by bearer, as they might prove serviceable during the brief remainder of his existence in jail. He also requested, as a last act of friendship, that I would see his family to the parish workhouse, and forget that such a being ever lived. Of course I answered this note by going down with the boy to pay the money, where I found Mr. Micawber sitting in a corner, looking darkly at the sheriff's officer who had effected the capture. On his release, he embraced me with the utmost fervour, and made an entry of the transaction in his pocket-book, being very particular, I recollect, about a halfpenny I inadvertently omitted from my statement of the total. This momentous pocket-book was a timely reminder to him of another transaction. On our return to the room upstairs, where he accounted for his absence by saying that it had been occasioned by circumstances over which he had no control, he took out of it a large sheet of paper, folded small, and quite covered with long sums, carefully worked. From the glimpse I had of them, I should say that I never saw such sums out of a school ciphering book. These, it seemed, were calculations of compound interest on what he called the principal amount of 41, 10, 11 and a half, for various periods. After a careful consideration of these, and an elaborate estimate of his resources, he had come to the conclusion to select that sum which represented the amount with compound interest to 2 years, 15 calendar months, and 14 days, from that date. For this he had drawn a note of hand with great neatness, which he handed over to Traddles on the spot, a discharge of his debt in full, as between man and man. With many acknowledgments, I have still a presentiment, said Mrs. Micawber, pensively shaking her head, that my family will appear on board before we finally depart. Mr. Micawber evidently had his presentiment on the subject too, but he put it in his tin pot and swallowed it. If you have any opportunity of sending letters home, on your passage, Mrs. Micawber, said my aunt, you must let us hear from you, you know. My dear Miss Trotwood, she replied, I shall only be too happy to think that anyone expects to hear from us. I shall not fail to correspond. Mr. Copperfield, I trust, as an old and familiar friend, will not object to receive occasional intelligence, himself, from one who knew him when the twins were yet unconscious. I said that I should hope to hear, whenever she had an opportunity of writing. Please heaven, there will be many such opportunities, said Mr. Micawber. The ocean, in these times, is a perfect fleet of ships, and we can hardly fail to encounter many, in running over. It is merely crossing, said Mr. Micawber, trifling with his eyeglass, merely crossing. The distance is quite imaginary. I think, now, how odd it was, but how wonderfully like Mr. Micawber, that, when he went from London to Canterbury, he should have talked as if he were going to the farthest limits of the earth, and, when he went from England to Australia, as if he were going for a little trip across the Channel. On the voyage, I shall endeavour, said Mr. Micawber, occasionally to spin them a yarn, and the melody of my son Wilkins will, I trust, be acceptable at the galley fire. When Mrs. Micawber has her sea legs on, an expression in which I hope there is no conventional impropriety, she will give them, I dare say, little tafflin. Porpoises and dolphins, I believe, will be frequently observed athwart our bows, and, either on the starboard or the larboard quarter, objects of interest will be continually descried. In short, said Mr. Micawber, with the old genteel air, the probability is, all will be found so exciting, alow and aloft, that when the lookout, stationed in the maintop, cries Lando, we shall be very considerably astonished. With that he flourished off the contents of his little tin pot, as if he had made the voyage, and had passed a first-class examination before the highest naval authorities. "What I chiefly hope, my dear Mr. Copperfield," said Mrs. Micawber, "is, that in some branches of our family we may live again in the old country. Do not frown, Micawber. I do not now refer to my own family, but to our children's children. However vigorous the sapling," said Mrs. Micawber, shaking her head, "I cannot forget the parent tree, and when our race attains to eminence and fortune, I own I should wish that fortune to flow into the coffers of Britannia." "My dear," said Mr. Micawber, "Britannia must take her chance. I am bound to say that she has never done much for me, and that I have no particular wish upon the subject." "Micawber," returned Mrs. Micawber, "there, you are wrong. You are going out, Micawber, to this distant clime, to strengthen, not to weaken, the connection between yourself and Albion." "The connection in question, my love," rejoined Mr. Micawber, "has not laid me, I repeat, under that load of personal obligation, that I am at all sensitive as to the formation of another connection." "Micawber," returned Mrs. Micawber, "there, I again say, you are wrong. You do not know your power, Micawber. It is that which will strengthen, even in this step you are about to take, the connection between yourself and Albion." Mr. Micawber sat in his elbow chair, with his eyebrows raised, half receiving and half repudiating Mrs. Micawber's views as they were stated, but very sensible of their foresight. "My dear Mr. Copperfield," said Mrs. Micawber, "I wish Mr. Micawber to feel his position. It appears to me highly important that Mr. Micawber should, from the hour of his embarkation, feel his position. Your old knowledge of me, my dear Mr. Copperfield, will have told you that I have not the sanguine disposition of Mr. Micawber. My disposition is, if I may say so, eminently practical. I know that this is a long voyage. I know that it will involve many privations and inconveniences. I cannot shut my eyes to those facts. But I also know what Mr. Micawber is. I know the latent power of Mr. Micawber, and therefore I consider it vitally important that Mr. Micawber should feel his position." "My love," he observed, "perhaps you will allow me to remark that it is barely possible that I do feel my position at the present moment." "I think not, Micawber," she rejoined. "Not fully. My dear Mr. Copperfield, Mr. Micawber's is not a common case. Mr. Micawber is going to a distant country expressly in order that he may be fully understood and appreciated for the first time. I wish Mr. Micawber to take his stand upon that vessel's prow, and firmly say, 'This country I am come to conquer. Have you honours? Have you riches? Have you posts of profitable pecuniary emolument? Let them be brought forward. They are mine.'" Mr. Micawber, glancing at us all, seemed to think there was a good deal in this idea. "I wish Mr. Micawber, if I make myself understood," said Mrs. Micawber, in her argumentative tone, "to be the Caesar of his own fortunes. That, my dear Mr. Copperfield, appears to me to be his true position. From the first moment of this voyage, I wish Mr. Micawber to stand upon that vessel's prow and say, 'Enough of delay, enough of disappointment, enough of limited means. That was in the old country. This is the new. Produce your reparation. Bring it forward.'" Mr. Micawber folded his arms in a resolute manner, as if he were then stationed on the figurehead. "And doing that," said Mrs. Micawber, feeling his position, "am I not right in saying that Mr. Micawber will strengthen, and not weaken, his connection with Britain? An important public character arising in that hemisphere, shall I be told that its influence will not be felt at home? Can I be so weak as to imagine that Mr. Micawber, wielding the rod of talent and of power in Australia, will be nothing in England? I am but a woman, but I should be unworthy of myself and of my papa, if I were guilty of such absurd weakness." Mrs. Micawber's conviction that her arguments were unanswerable gave a moral elevation to her tone which I think I had never heard in it before, "and therefore it is," said Mrs. Micawber, "that I the more wish that, at a future period, we may live again on the parent soil. Mr. Micawber may be, I cannot disguise from myself that the probability is, Mr. Micawber will be, a page of history, and he ought then to be represented in the country which gave him birth, and did not give him employment." "My love," observed Mr. Micawber, "it is impossible for me not to be touched by your affection. I am always willing to defer to your good sense. What will be, will be. Heaven forbid that I should grudge my native country any portion of the wealth that may be accumulated by our descendants." "That's well," said my aunt, nodding towards Mr. Peggotty, "and I drink my love to you all, and every blessing and success attend you." Mr. Peggotty put down the 2 children he had been nursing, one on each knee, to join Mr. and Mrs. Micawber in drinking to all of us in return, and when he and the Micawbers cordially shook hands as comrades, and his brown face brightened with a smile, I felt that he would make his way, establish a good name, and be beloved, go where he would. Even the children were instructed, each to dip a wooden spoon into Mr. Micawber's pot, and pledge us in its contents. When this was done, my aunt and Agnes rose, and parted from the emigrants. It was a sorrowful farewell. They were all crying. The children hung about Agnes to the last, and we left poor Mrs. Micawber in a very distressed condition, sobbing and weeping by a dim candle, that must have made the room look, from the river, like a miserable lighthouse. That I went down again next morning to see that they were away. They had departed, in a boat, as early as 5 o'clock. It was a wonderful instance to me of the gap such partings make, that although my association of them with the tumble-down public-house and the wooden stairs dated only from last night, both seemed dreary and deserted, now that they were gone. Did I, in the afternoon of the next day, my old nurse and I went down to Gravesend. We found the ship in the river, surrounded by a crowd of boats, a favourable wind blowing, the signal for sailing at her masthead. I hired a boat directly, and we put off to her, and getting through the little vortex of confusion of which she was the centre, went on board. Mr. Peggotty was waiting for us on deck. He told me that Mr. Micawber had just now been arrested again, and for the last time, at the Shoot of Heap, and that, in compliance with a request I had made to him, he had paid the money, which I repaid him. He then took us down between decks, and there, any lingering fears I had of his having heard any rumours of what had happened, were dispelled by Mr. Micawber's coming out of the gloom, taking his arm with an air of friendship and protection, and telling me that they had scarcely been asunder for a moment, since the night before last at tea was such a strange scene to me, and so confined and dark, that, at first, I could make out hardly anything, but, by degrees, it cleared, as my eyes became more accustomed to the gloom, and I seemed to stand in a picture by Arstade. Among the great beams, bulks, and ringbolts of the ship, and the emigrant berths, and chests, and bundles, and barrels, and heaps of miscellaneous baggage, lighted up, here and there, by dangling lanterns, and elsewhere by the yellow daylight straying down a windsail or a hatchway, were crowded groups of people, making new friendships, taking leave of one another, talking, laughing, crying, eating and drinking, some already settled down into the possession of their few feet of space, with their little households arranged, and tiny children established on stools, or in dwarf elbow chairs. Others, despairing of a resting place, and wandering disconsolately, from babies who had but a week or two of life behind them, to crooked old men and women who seemed to have but a week or two of life before them, and from ploughmen bodily carrying out soil of England on their boots, to smiths taking away samples of its soot and smoke upon their skins. Every age and occupation appeared to be crammed into the narrow compass of the 'tween decks. Yes, my eye glanced round this place. I thought I saw sitting, by an open port, with one of the Micawber children near her, a figure like Emily's. It first attracted my attention, by another figure parting from it with a kiss, and as it glided calmly away through the disorder, reminding me of Agnes. But in the rapid motion and confusion, and in the unsettlement of my own thoughts, I lost it again, and only knew that the time was come when all visitors were being warned to leave the ship, that my nurse was crying on a chest beside me, and that Mrs. Gummidge, assisted by some younger stooping woman in black, was busily arranging Mr. Peggotty's goods. "Is there any last word, Marser Davy?" said he. "Is there any one forgotten thing afore we parts?" "One thing," said I, "Martha." He touched the younger woman I have mentioned on the shoulder, and Martha stood before me. "Heaven bless you, you good man," cried I. "You take her with you." She answered for him, with a burst of tears. I could speak no more at that time, but I wrung his hand, and if ever I have loved and honored any man, I loved and honored that man in my soul. The ship was clearing fast of strangers. The greatest trial that I had remained. I told him what the noble spirit that was gone had given me in charge to say at parting. It moved him deeply. But when he charged me, in return, with many messages of affection and regret for those deaf ears, he moved me more. The time was come. I embraced him, took my weeping nurse upon my arm, and hurried away. On deck, I took leave of poor Mrs. Micawber. She was looking distractedly about for her family, even then, and her last words to me were, that she never would desert Mr. Micawber. We went over the side into our boat, and lay at a little distance, to see the ship wafted on her course. It was then calm, radiant sunset. She lay between us, and the red light, and every taper line and spar was visible against the glow. A sight at once so beautiful, so mournful, and so hopeful, as the glorious ship, lying, still, on the flushed water, with all the life on board her crowded at the bulwarks, and there clustering, for a moment, bareheaded and silent. I never saw silent, only for a moment. As the sails rose to the wind, and the ship began to move, there broke from all the boats 3 resounding cheers, which those on board took up, and echoed back, and which were echoed and re-echoed. My heart burst out when I heard the sound, and beheld the waving of the hats and handkerchiefs, and then I saw her. At her uncle's side, and trembling on his shoulder. He pointed to us with an eager hand, and she saw us, and waved. her last good-bye to me. I, Emily, beautiful and drooping, cling to him with the utmost trust of thy bruised heart, for he has clung to thee with all the might of his great love. Surrounded by the rosy light, and standing high upon the deck, apart together, she clinging to him, and he holding her, they solemnly passed away. The night had fallen on the Kentish hills when we were rowed ashore, and fallen darkly upon me.